Ask him. So let's go by satellite to Paris and say, can you hear me, Chuck Barris?
Yes, I can, Clive, loud and clear.
Chuck, how did you come up with the idea of the Gong Show?
Well, at the time in America, there weren't many places for good acts to be seen. There weren't any variety shows on television. All the nightclubs were closed. So I thought we should have a half-hour television show with a window of opportunity for all sorts of good young acts. So I went looking across the country and I couldn't find any. I only could find bad young acts.
The supply of non-talent is infinite, so really the show should have gone on forever. So how did you know the show's days were numbered?
We had an act called the Popsicle Twins, which sort of set the pace for our demise. I mean, we would come down to the studio with 30 or 40 acts every weekend. And the standards and practices people, the censor, would always arbitrarily get rid of an act, no matter what. I mean, I never could understand it. The act I thought was perfectly fine. So rather than lose a good act, I would always bring an act down that was abominable, that they couldn't possibly use, you know. And they would get rid of it, and then we'd have the rest to deal with. But this one time I brought down one of those abominable acts, one of those acts I didn't think they could possibly use, called the Popsicle Twins. And they were two little 17 or 18-year-old girls, you know, well-built little pubescent things there that skipped out onto the stage and sat down, and they just licked these orange popsicles in a very intriguing manner. And the censor never said a word. I don't think they were in the studio. And then I thought to myself, well, maybe they were not so bad, and I put them on the air. And, of course, the phones lit up all over the country, and it was bedlam.
Selecting the contestants was obviously a very important part of the dating game. So how did you choose the best ones?
Well, we would see dozens and dozens of people, pretty girls and great-looking guys, and we'd had to make a distinction between them. So we'd have this code that we'd write on their little forms, because they would always come over and kind of look over and see what we had written. So we'd have to write a code, so we would write on some PITA, which was pain in the ass, or DAAR, which was dumb as a rock. And then we would, you know, kids would come in with these terrible acne things, and we put down VOPE, victim of a pizza explosion. We would put down TW, which was the worst. And it was a way for us but we got through it, you know, we came up there. And then when the contestants wouldn't perform in those early days, back in the 60s, I would be so distraught. I would go up and I'd look at their little Polaroid picture and say, you know, why did you do that to me? But by and large, the shows were pretty good.
The dating game had a lot of celebrity contestants. Were there any real superstars?
Everybody who was anybody came through that show at one time or other. I mean, we had Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sally Field, Burt Reynolds, Farrah Fawcett, Groucho Marx.
Didn't I read that Steve Martin started on the show?
Steve Martin, the Marquee Chimps. That was one of our greatest shows, actually, when we had the Marquee Chimps. The three monkeys that were, you know, performing in a circus. The girl didn't know she was talking to three chimpanzees. And just before they went on, the trainer gave they gave them all M&Ms to keep them calm. And the first monkey dropped his M&Ms in his lap, but it was too late. They were on the air, and the monkey kept digging into his crotch for his M&Ms. It looked like we had this major perverted monkey on the air. But all of those people, you know, did the show one time. Arnold Schwarzenegger once told the girl his measurements. He said, you know, he had whatever they were. His shoulders were 69, his chest was 42, and his waist was 28. And he said, what does that mean to you? And the girl said, it means you get smaller as you go down. And he said, that's not the truth.
Did you have any especially memorable personal problems with the contestants on your shows?
Yes. Well, we had a show called How's Your Mother-in-Law, which was a thing I created where a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law would accuse the mother-in-law of some heinous crime, and then they would have, they'd have to prove whether it was true or not. And the mother-in-law would be exonerated or not at the end of the show. But on this one show with all the mother-in-laws sitting out there, we heard this noise, you know. This noise was coming across our earphones and in the studio. And it sounded like there was something wrong with the air conditioning. And I found out, somebody said, well, we called an engineer up and said, can you stop that noise? I said, what's it sound like? I said, it sounds like somebody's farting. And he said, well, and I thought, wait a minute, that's it. And we went out, and sure enough, one of these poor women was having a problem. I walked over to her and I whispered in her ear, are you okay? And she said, no, I'm not. I said, what's the problem? She said, I'm suffering from uncontrollable gas. And I said, is there something that I can do to help? She said, no. And
should have struck a gong. Chuck, the satellite's moving on. I enjoyed talking to you. Thank you very much, Chuck Barris.